All right. Well, here we are, episode 3, I think. Right, Ryan? Is it 3 or 4? This is 3. Okay, 3. Episode 3, bikes included, and I'm stoked to be here with Jake Jacobson at Spokes in downtown Kansas City, Quality Hill. So, Jake, before we get started, why don't we do let's do a quick intro for our audience. And here, first of all, cheers to
cheers.
Good to see you, buddy. I don't think I've seen you since before the pandemic.
I was going to say, it's good to see you in person, not just in Zoom or emails.
It's been a while. So give us a little background on Jake, man, and how you got into biking.
Sure. So I had always been more of a runner than a cyclist. And so when I got kind of what seemed to be the dream job was doing PR for the outdoor and fitness space at Garmin.
Yeah.
And so I
was hoping you would tell this story.
Yeah. So I had spent 10 years in journalism. And then Garmin, obviously worldwide GPS company based here in Kansas City, was growing quickly. And the two fastest growing markets were outdoor and fitness. So outdoor is your hiking, fishing, golfing, and then on the fitness side, running and cycling.
Yeah.
And
when was this?
This was 2007.
Okay.
And I remember when I went, they loved the fact that I was a runner, and I'm like, and I can learn cycling. I'm like, and at the time I'm like, I ride a bike, but not really knowing what I was getting myself into. So the first year, we started introducing a lot of new projects. I got to run the Chicago Marathon on zero notice, just because in order to earn street cred with these journalists, you kind of have to walk the walk or sometimes run the run for 26.2 miles.
Like how short notice, or just like no notice?
It was 10 weeks notice total.
Oh my God.
I made the mistake. I'll tell the story really quickly just because it's fun. So I was at our Garmin store on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. We were doing a kickoff for Chicago Marathon, and we had Bart Yasso, the chief running officer from Runner's World, and the head of the Chicago Marathon, Kerry Pinkowski. And so the three of us went out for a run, because that's what you do when you're around a bunch of runners.
Sure.
And while we were out, Bart asked me, he's like, so, you're a distance runner. What's your favorite marathon? And I was like, well, I really haven't done a marathon yet.
Boy.
And he's like, oh, so you're not really a distance runner. And I'm like, man, that hurts. Wow. But in his mind, he's just trying to categorize me.
Yeah.
And I try to save myself. And I said, but and I look at Kerry, the head of Chicago Marathon, and I said, but I'll tell you what, if I ever do one, Chicago will be my first.
Okay.
And Chicago always sells out immediately. And this was July. And so I figure I'm buying myself a year.
Okay.
And I told Kerry, I'm like, I've heard it's fast, it's flat, it's fun. So if I ever do one, Chicago will be my first. And I think that I've saved myself. I get back to the office, and there's an entry waiting for me for that year's Chicago Marathon, which was in 10 weeks.
Oh, boy.
And so I used the opportunity to write back to Bart from Runner's World, and I said, hey, great to meet you. Kerry, weirdest thing, sent me an entry, but there's no way it's 10 weeks away, and I'm only doing 3 or 4 miles at a time. And he writes back and says, no problem. And he has kind of a high-pitched voice. That's my Bart impression. But he's like, no problem. And he sends me a custom 10-week training plan when normally most people do 20.
Okay.
Especially for your first.
All right.
So I write back and I said, thank you very much. But 2 of those last 3 weeks, I'm going to be in Italy. And so I probably shouldn't do it, right? He is the exact wrong person to ask for a second opinion. He writes back and says, no problem, taper. And he makes it a 7-week training plan. So I ran Chicago, and this was 2007. It was the year that it was 90 degrees. A guy died. 10,000 people didn't even bother showing up. They stopped the race at 3 hours and 50 minutes.
Oh, my God.
And I finished in 3:49:28. And so I finished and they shut the clocks off.
Oh, wow.
I still remember being handed a lukewarm beer at the finish, and it was the worst tasting beer ever. But I was in the marathon club, and I learned right then, I'm just like, sometimes you just have to dive in and immerse yourself.
Yeah.
So fast forward a year, now this is my second summer with Garmin, and I find out that we're about to sponsor a pro tour, world tour cycling team.
Yeah.
So we're going to sign on with Slipstream.
Okay.
So this great collection of cyclists, Jonathan Vatter's head of the team, and we're going to make this announcement. And with it, we are also invited to the Tour de France.
Yeah.
And my VP at the time comes up to me and says, you're going to go to France. And I'm like, oh, sounds great. And he's like, and you're going to become the face of Garmin cycling around the world. I'm like, well, that's unfortunate, but sure, and again, I thought that I knew cycling.
Yeah.
What I realized, I didn't know the nuance. I didn't know the personalities.
Yeah.
And so my way, taking me back to my cram sessions of college, I read two different books on the way there and I'm flipping through. These are just the tomes of professional cycling.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading, and I land. And one of the first people I run into is Jonathan Vaughters, and then Christian Vandevelde, David Miller, and they're the nicest guys.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, I remember you from my book. And I must have looked like, it'd be like walking up to LeBron James and saying, I hear you play basketball, And
right.
they were the nicest, but they also knew that I didn't know.
Well, and those guys were in the heat of their prime.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. That's the year that Christian finished fourth.
Yeah. He's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
I had a chance to meet him one time. Actually, you introduced me to him, I think.
At the Garmin ride-alongs.
Yes.
And so day one of the 2008 Tour de France, I'm realizing that I don't have Wi-Fi, and I'm being sent over to talk about the team on our corporate blog, because Garmin had a really great blog, way ahead of its time.
So you were supposed to write and cover the race.
I was supposed to promote the team, which is the whole reason I'm there. And I'm supposed to talk to journalists about, the new Edge 705 that we had. And of course it was in team colors and everything, because they used the Edge on the tour. And we're like, that's pretty cool that a device made right here in Kansas City is being used at the Tour de France.
Yeah.
And it's a difference maker.
Absolutely.
Because they can see the routes and everything. But I knew nothing about professional cycling, and so on day one, I'm like, I'm going to get fired because I'm not able to blog because there's no Wi-Fi in rural France, and I'm going to be in a van. I'm going to be all these things. And so a couple of cyclists were like, well, have you ever tried Twitter?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, Twitter's dumb. Again, Twitter was 1 year old at the time. People used it to share pictures of their lunch with their two friends or whatever. But between guys at the race and then my buddy Ryan Ressler here in town, who also was working at Garmin at the time, they were both like, no, Twitter's great because you can follow the sport from anywhere.
Yeah.
And so if you think about now how we watch a Chiefs game, last night on Monday Night Football, everybody's sitting there scrolling
Live
through
tweeting,
Twitter at the same time you're watching the game.
Yeah.
This was the way cyclists were back in 2008 already, because there was no mainstream media coverage.
So they were early to it.
Yeah, so Garmin's Twitter account was born in the backseat of a van at the 2008 Tour de France. It was my face as the avatar, because we wanted people to know that they were actually talking to a real person.
Now, so did you ask for, this is funny though, so did you ask for approval?
No.
Or did you just go in and set the handle up?
We just did it. Yeah, we just did it.
Oh my God, good for you.
And then afterward, made sure we didn't get fired. And I look
was
back.
Was at Garmin available?
No. So somebody was squatting on it. And so we used at Jake's Journal.
Okay.
Because that was my blog handle for the Garmin blog.
So did you ever, how did they secure Garmin later?
So somehow, I think because we were one of the early brands to really be making a big splash, but it was really silly because people would say, I'm shopping for a new Jake's Journal Edge 705.
Nice.
So we knew we were losing on brand equity.
Brand equity, yeah.
And Twitter wanted to play nice. And so this person who had just been squatting on Garmin, they kicked him off.
Nice.
And they gave it to us.
Good.
Nowadays, I think you'd probably have to pay a really big price.
Yeah.
But personally, that kind of stunk because here I had built up this channel and then everything just shifted over to the Garmin brand. And so then I remember somebody saying, oh, I thought you were already on Twitter. Why are you at 0 followers? I'm like, I'm starting over.
Oh, man.
But no, so it was fantastic. And so because of that, then I was able to track the tour and give these behind the scenes glimpses. But this was still, I'm doing it on a BlackBerry, and the only way to include photos is to link back to, Flickr or whatever. And so it was definitely not the intuitive interface that it is now. But I got back from, I think it was the tour of California the next spring, and suddenly I had hundreds of more followers on the Jake's Journal /Garmin account. And it's because somebody had put together a list of 23 accounts to follow that aren't Lance, if you're a pro cycling fan. And I was right there between like Axel Merckx and somebody else, and it was all, if you want behind the scenes access to the Pro Tour races, follow Jake's Journal. So did you go into your boss at Garmin, like, look what I did? Yeah, it was kind of cool, right? You're able to say, because at the time it was so early that it was kind of like the executive leadership would kind of pat you on your head and then send you on your way, and so it was mostly as long as I didn't embarrass the brand, then I probably wasn't going to get fired, but there wasn't a lot of thought behind it. Dude. And now to look at it, and ironically, the person who now heads up the Garmin social media content team is an old buddy of mine from the Kansas City Star. Okay. And it's really cool to see what they're doing now. And now they've got a team of like 12, 15 people doing what I was essentially doing just as a one-man show. Oh, that's awesome. But it was a great way to get immersed in social media.
Yeah.
But then to get back to bikes, it was a fantastic way to truly just dive headfirst into the world of cycling, because that same day, on the first day of the tour, I'm in a helicopter with Jonathan Vaughters above the peloton, and he's explaining the math of a breakaway. He's explaining the physics of a slipstream, and he's telling me all about team strategy from above the peloton at the tour.
Oh my God.
And I always say it's like instant PhD in cycling.
Oh my God.
And it was, I think, the next day when Will Frischkorn just barely got edged out for the first win at the tour. And I remember talking to Will afterward, and he knew exactly what he had done, and he broke it all down for me. And learning from those guys, and Christian was the nicest, David Miller was the nicest, everybody was so awesome. And they would teach me because they were excited that I was so excited.
Yeah.
And because I didn't come in and try to act like the smartest guy in the room, because I was far
approaching
from it.
From a learner's perspective.
And they loved teaching me. And so here I'm getting to know these guys just as good humans.
Yeah.
And then I also get to follow their career and see them just shine. And,
that's awesome. So you still keep in touch with those guys, or?
There's a couple that I'll shoot notes to on social media or whatever. I was excited. I hung out with Will a couple times after he retired, Will Frischkorn, and he now owns a great shop called Cured in Boulder, where they do wines and meats and cheeses, and it's great. And so
cool.
I think he just hit 10 years of having that up and running, which blows my mind. But no, they're all good guys, and that's what I loved about Team Garmin /Slipstream /Garmin Chipotle, is that they all had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because they were all racing clean.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they all knew that they had to be so transparent, and so the journalists loved them.
Yeah.
And that made my job easier. And so even though they wouldn't say it, you had some of the world's top cycling journalists cheering for the Argyle Armada because they knew that they were good guys. And
that's awesome, man.
And then selfishly, I got to learn from the best minds in professional cycling.
Yeah.
Because I was around Alan Lim, and I was around, one of my favorite, and this turned into a lasting friendship that has impact on where we are today. But I was in a sponsor meeting, and you've got, at the time it was Pearl Izumi, Felt, Shimano, like reps from all these different brands.
Yeah.
And a guy walks into the back, sits in the back corner, and he's in a Carhartt that's just greasy on the elbows and just covered, just salt of the earth. And somebody asked Doug Martin from Felt at the time a question. He's like, well, let's ask Jim. And it was Jim Felt, the founder of Felt Bicycles, who was over there in his Carhartt, and just the nicest guy. And he quickly became like my adopted uncle. I've been able to stay at his house during the Tour of California, and he was just like, well, you need a bike. And I was like, yes, I do. And what I loved about it was when I was asking him what kind of felt I should get, he never tried upselling me. He's like, look, he goes, you're not the most experienced, not the most talented rider. Right. You don't need, every bell and whistle.
$5,000 bike.
Exactly. And so he found me it's a beautiful bike, and I still ride it today, 12 years later. Yeah. And it just feels good.
Yeah. They're good bikes.
But being able to get to know, and then I keep going off on tangents, but getting to know Jim then helped us become a Felt dealer here at Spokes. Yeah,
so tell me about that. So how did you get involved with Spokes, and how are you involved, and how has it been? There's bikes all around us here. Shout out to Spokes. So we are at Spokes Cyclery at Washington and 12th in downtown Kansas City, one of two in KC.
So three of my really good friends, Dan Walsh, Ty Henson, Ryan Adams, had this idea where they wanted to have a bike shop that was also a bar and cafe.
Yeah.
And there are several bike shops that also will pour you a beer or pour you a coffee, and they're fantastic. Yep. And then these guys put this little spin on it where they said, well, what if we focus on the cafe and also have a full service bike shop in back instead of flipping it around, And so because of that, 5 years ago now, we opened up shop, and I was one of the original investors along with about 20 of our friends. And we all kind of figured, even if no one else came here, even if it's just our clubhouse,
cool place to hang out.
Yeah, we could have a beer, we could have a breakfast burrito, and we could, be able to talk bikes.
On and
and then suddenly people started falling in love with the menu.
Yeah.
And people started falling in love with the breakfast burritos and messenger coffee and having a beer. And obviously being able to drop your bike off, or pre-pandemic, we would host a lot of group rides here and then grab tacos and beer afterward. Now with the pandemic, the great thing is we never had to close one single day of the pandemic. We've adjusted our hours a little bit. And so like the Walnut Shop is now Monday through Friday just because there's not as much traffic on the weekends over at 10th and Walnut. But here at Washington, we've got so many apartments around here that people use this as an extension of their kitchen. And so we're open from 7 to 4. And we do a great breakfast traffic. We've got great lunches. And what I have loved about it from day one is it's a place for people who love bikes and or coffee and or beer and or good food, but aren't jerks about any of them. So like there's no ego. If you walk in and you don't know a thing about bikes, you can ask our mechanic and you're not going to get a nose turned up at you. You know, but also if you ride a 10,000 carbon fiber road bike, $10,000 carbon fiber, you can come in here and get your answers.
Get it worked on.
And so it's just that whole range. And while they're working on your bike, you can sit here and have a beer. You can drop your bike off and pick it up next weekend. And the vibe of it has become this great little gathering spot in the community that even people who have never even sat on a bike love to come here and have their work meetings here.
What I love about this place is, you know, it's in the city. You know, like my office up until before the pandemic was in the city. And I would bring my bike to the office and I would work, you know, do lunch rides, or I had a routine there where I would go and ride to DI, Dimensional Innovations, and back, which is, you know, 15 miles or whatever. But having a place in the city where you can get your bike worked on is not, you know, it's
not that common.
It's not that common, you know.
Or it's only open from 9 to 4.
And
so
you go after work. So I love having a place in the city you can go, and you know, I came here a lot when we had our office over there. So you know, and the ownership group is great. But it leads me to a question about, you know, one of the things that I've always had tremendous respect for you is just your relationship to Kansas City. Like I you know, I'm not blowing smoke here, but like when I think about Kansas City, I think about you. Like you're like Mr. Kansas City, man. I think it's great, and I've been fortunate enough to get to know you, and you know, I'm curious how you feel about, you know, just the relationship between bikes and a city. You know, cycling in a city, because I feel like a large part of, like, I feel like I didn't really know Kansas City until I started riding my bike.
That's a great way to put it.
You know,
I think that it's an evolving relationship between bikes and Kansas City. I think that as downtown has had this renaissance over the last 10, 15 years, first, it was almost too busy too soon, and bikes didn't feel welcome down here at all. And now you've got the bike trail over on Gillum. You've got, I'm a board member for Bike Walk KC, and so I always say, like, they are known for being advocates. You know, they are known for making policy change and creating safer streets for pedestrian and for cyclists. And what's nice is, instead of feeling like you have to ask for permission or apologies if you want to bike and walk around Kansas City, now it does feel like there's a little bit more sharing of the roads and a little bit more appreciation. You're less likely to be run off the road than you were before. One of my favorite aspects, again, pre-pandemic, when we did those social rides on Wednesday nights, it was just a 10 or 12 mile ride. It was, you know,
casual,
very casual. In fact, because we'd have beers and tacos afterward, more people gained weight from those rides than lost weight. But what we did was we tried to break down the myth that downtown cycling was difficult or dangerous, because it doesn't have to be, you know. And so we had 4 different routes. Two of them took us to the Northland. One, you know, turned into an airport loop. But then we also did one where we would go around Liberty Memorial. And so you're going Crown Center, you're going through City Market. And what was cool was that people were nervous about it, but we'd start going and they're like, you know, this isn't bad. I'm like, you're right. You know, like we would do Cliff Drive, and
that's a great ride.
Getting to teach people about Cliff Drive that have never seen it before. It's like,
it's like the hidden part of Kansas City.
It's just like you rode through the bubble into Wakanda. You know, you're like, you get
so crazy.
You get down there and people are taking pictures. And I was always the sweeper. First of all, because I'm not that fast, but also because I am the social guy. And I didn't want the people who were in the back of the ride feeling like they were slowing us down.
Feel uncomfortable,
And so instead, I'm just like, no, I'm going to sit here and chat with you no matter how fast or slow we're going. And hearing these cyclists, who you could tell very recreational, you know, maybe they'd be on their bike, you know, a lot of them said that the only time they ever rode during the summer was on our social rides. but for them to appreciate going up the hill toward Liberty Memorial, and they're like, I've never done that. And also I've never thought I could do that. And I'm like, you change your gears and you're good, or being able to ride around City Market. And they're like, man, I'm going to bring my bike down here on the weekend sometime. I'm like, that's what we want.
That's what we want. Yeah.
So I think that it's a growing appreciation.
Yeah.
I think there is more empathy between business leaders and cyclists.
Yeah.
I also think cyclists have come a long way. Instead of feeling like every car is against them.
Yeah.
There were a few years ago, I was on a group ride, and one of the guys who was leading it felt like he wanted to pick a fight with every car.
Yep.
And that's not the case,
Yeah.
And I would say that as cyclists, we earn a lot of the criticism because we blow through stop signs.
They blow through stop signs. You wonder why
we go 4 abreast on a single lane road, and then there's a lot of cars that earn their reputation by being jerks to us, and buzzing the tower when they don't need to. But and that's a great question. I appreciate you asking, because I'm sitting here thinking, and most of the examples I have are more from 6-7 years ago than the last 3 or 4 years.
I do feel like it's gotten better.
Yep.
Yeah. I feel a lot safer in the city and just generally on the bike than I did several years ago.
And I think also getting changes in city leadership. You know, Eric Bunch being on city council. With his bike walk routes. I mean, talk about somebody who just advocates for multimodal transportation. And then even Mayor Lucas, knowing that he is a runner and he's, very active. And so he wants our streets to be safe for every mode of transportation, not just build it for the car. And so I think there have just been some fundamental shifts in thinking that you don't have to be out in the burbs on a trail to ride your bike. But I also love that there are plenty of great bike trails in the burbs to ride your bikes.
So. What's interesting to me is the being able to get from the city to the burbs. And to be able and just to see the change. Like, going back to saying I didn't know Kansas City until the bike. Like, I remember actually vividly the day that you and I rode to a barbecue. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, but that's a route that goes all around the city. All the stops are barbecue joints.
And the whole time you're like, how did I get here from there?
Like and I remember going home that night telling my wife, like, where we were at. And she's like, wait, you were in,
on your bike?
You got all the way from like Martin City to downtown. Like, how did you do that? How did you, like, the thought of being able to do that on a bike is foreign to people. But, the routes in this city, you can get around easily.
A lot of my friends who are also on the Domestiques team for Bike MS, again, they're way too fast. They ride way too far for me. But on the days where they slow down and I gear up and we go out with each other, like I remember the first time that we went from a downtown location to Shawnee Mission Park. And the whole time I'm like, this was easier than I thought. And we went through some neighborhoods that I had never been through before. They were beautiful.
Isn't that cool?
And
the best way to see a city is on a bike.
I remember saying to one of them, I'm like, man, this feels like we're getting close to Shawnee Mission Park. They're like, yeah, we're about to enter it. I'm like, but how? How did we even do that?
I know.
And now that I live right by Shawnee Mission Park, I was like, I can kind of reverse the route and figure out how I can get to Brookside, how I can get to Olathe, how I can get to, the Legends.
Isn't that awesome?
And it's really cool. And so I think that we still have some room to go with the relationship between the city and the cycling world. But I do like how both sides of that equation are coming closer to center.
That's really well put. Well, man, I know we're running up against time here, and the team at Spokes wants to get home, and I appreciate that. So I just want to say thanks for taking the time, man. I know you're super busy. And let's get on a bike soon, man.
I would love that. Yes, I definitely need to.
Dude,
but no, this was fun, and I feel like we were just getting up and running. So if we need to do a part 2 someday, we can do that
too. We should go do one at the other location. I have not seen it yet.
There we go. Let's do it. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, I do too. Well, Jake Jacobson, everybody, creator of the Garmin cycling Twitter handle. Everybody, all right, take care, dude.
See you, man.
See you, bye.